Me, that would be
Don't be scared. I was telling someone, like, who was I speaking to? I think it was Marjahn and Adelle, how someone was like, is this going to be recorded? I get all these DMs like, it's going to be recorded. I'm like, oh my goodness, don't hurt me, please. Just a messenger. I just make it do what it do, boo. Yeah, so I'm going to start the webinar, y'all. It's lit. Okay, let's go.
all right.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank y'all so much for being here. We're going to get started in a minute. So, oh, your mom is on the call?
Yes, girl. You could imagine Andrea got her set up too, boy.
Well, it was kind of my sister.
Makes sense.
Oh my goodness. Hi, everyone. Thank y'all so much for joining. As usual, feel free to drop your name, your pronouns, where you're from, and what brings you to the conversation in the chat. Last time there was like folks from all over. And that's like super exciting. So please feel free to do that. And we're going to get started in 1 minute or so. I'm so excited your mom is on the call. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, she's my biggest cheerleader.
That's so cute. I love it.
It's my baby.
Hi, Mark from Montgomery County, Maryland. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Mark.
How you doing, Mark? Hey, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, he invited a few of his co-workers at the school that he's teaching at to come drop by for the conversation as well. Since there's a lot of conversation that he's trying to put, I think around the county, a lot of people are looking for different resources and also wanting to talk about climate change and its impact. So people are really tuned in. It's really lovely.
Well, we get to be among the best of the best, right? In this conversation. Okay, so we're gonna wait for one more minute, and then hi, Sophia from Charlottesville. Thank you so much for being here. But we're gonna get started in 1 minute or so, just waiting for more people to pop in, and then we are going to get started. Perfect. Well, I'm just going, oh, hi, Caitlin. Oh, there's more people. Hi, Caitlin. You're from Charlottesville. Yesenia from Orlando. Patience. Wow, from NYC. All right, y'all, we're gonna get started. This is so exciting. Thank y'all so much for being here. Oh, someone's joining from Oakland. Okay, I see you, Oakland, okay. But anyway, how are y'all? Thank you for being here. My name is Jamie Swift. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of Black Men Radicals. And if you're not familiar with Black Men Radicals, we are a Black feminist advocacy organization dedicated to uplifting and centering Black feminist radicalism around the world. I'm super excited to be joining in or introducing this amazing event co-curated by Nana Brantuo and Dr. Andrea N. Baldwin for the second installment of our Caribbean Feminism series on environmental and climate justice, right? And if you're familiar with the Caribbean Feminism series, we had a first installment last time with an amazing reading list by Nana and Andrea to learn more and interrogate the width, the breadth, the brilliance of Caribbean feminist thought and behavior. And so with this conversation, we're honoring some of the most amazing, brilliant, talented climate and environmental researchers and activists. And it's our honor to have Marjahn, Dr. Adelle Thomas, Dr. Angelique Nixon, and Phylicia Alexander here to be discussing their work, their activism, and leadership. So before I pass it off to Nana and Andrea, I just ask that you respect this space because this space is a safe space. We do not allow any transphobia, homophobia, queerphobia, ableism, anything of that nature. I will have to kick you out. Also, I want to do a land acknowledgement. Currently, I am in Atlanta, Georgia, Muskogee Creek Nation land. And so I give honor and credence to First Nations and Indigenous people, right? And so I just want to pass it off to our brilliant co-curators, Nana Brantuo and Dr. Andrea N. Baldwin. Don't be scared, y'all. This is going to be a popping conversation, okay? You can breathe in and breathe out. This is going to be a lot of fun. So thank y'all so much for being here and enjoy this brilliant combo.
Awesome. What's up, y'all? I am Andrea Baldwin. I guess you can see that from my little square. But I'm so honored to continue this series with Nana and to invite for the first time some of our panelists and to also have some second timers on here as well, Angelique. And so what we're going to do first is that we're going to introduce you to the women today who we will be honoring their work and who will be sharing what they do with regard to climate and environmental justice in the Caribbean. And so I will start by introducing Phylicia Alexander Lavia. And she is the foundress and executive director of Redroot St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Inc., SVG, Inc., a non-governmental organization in her home country of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Redroot SVG is dedicated to the empowerment and support of underserved women, including LGBTQ plus communities and children. In addition to her volunteerism with Redroot SVG, she's also an activist raising awareness through songwriting and performance. She's just a badass. An experienced adolescent counselor and teacher, she has spent the majority of her years in education, lecturing at Her Majesty's prisons and technical institutions. Phylicia is pursuing a degree in social work with a minor in youth development at the University of the West Indies. She continues to positively impact the lives of many women through programs and projects executed by Redroot SVG. Her work has been even more important following the effects of COVID-19 and the 2021 eruption of the La Soufriere volcano and the recent strike of Hurricane Elsa on St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Welcome. Next, I will introduce Marjahn Finlayson. When Marjahn was younger, hurricanes frequently struck her home and destroyed so much. Growing up in Nassau, she witnessed the wreckage of Hurricane Michelle and Andrew. When she went to college, Hurricane Irene followed her up to Connecticut. Oh, you were in Connecticut? Me too, girl. Those events pushed her to study how tropical cyclones function and developed, especially concerning the changing climate. She is a research scientist at the Cape, pronounce that for me, Marjahn? Eleuthera Institute. At the Island School Cape Eleuthera Institute, she introduced climate and atmospheric sciences through her research and curriculum for students of all ages. Currently, her research focuses on hurricane behavior in the next 30 years and tropical cyclones in the Caribbean basin. She also works in partnership with NOAA on a large-scale sea glider project with a goal to improve hurricane prediction models, and also with the University of the Bahamas Climate Change Adaptation and Resilience Research Center on social impacts of climate change on Bahamian society. In the future, she hopes to continue her research as a PhD candidate at the Cape Eleuthera Institute. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. So we're going to switch off and now to introduce you to Dr. Adelle Thomas. Dr. Adelle Thomas is Senior Fellow of the Climate Change Adaptation and Resilience Research Center at the University of the Bahamas and Senior Research Associate with Climate Analytics. As a human environment geographer, her research is focused on adaptation, loss and damage, and vulnerability of small island developing states to climate change. Dr. Thomas has worked for over 15 years on intersections between climate change adaptation, disaster risk management, and sustainable development. Her research is centered on challenges and opportunities in adapting to climate change and in addressing loss and damage, particularly in the SIDS context. Dr. Thomas has authored a variety of academic publications and has also served as a lead author on several intergovernmental panel on climate change reports, including the special report on global warming of 1.5 Celsius degrees and the fifth assessment report. She's currently one of the few SIDS lead authors in the upcoming IPCC 6 assessment report, focusing on key risk across regions and sectors. Dr. Thomas has provided scientific services to a number of organizations, including the Global Environment Facility, Inter-American Development Bank, Green Climate Fund, International Maritime Organization, and national institutions in the United States and the Caribbean. Thank you so much for joining us. And last and certainly not least is Dr. Angelique Nixon. Dr. Angelique Nixon is a Bahamas-born and raised Trinidadian-based writer, artist, scholar, and activist. She's a lecturer and researcher at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, the University of West Indies, St. Augustine campus. Her research and creative work are widely available. She is author of the poetry and art chapbook titled Saltwater Healing, and the award-winning scholarly book titled Resisting Paradise, Tourism, Diaspora, and Sexuality in Caribbean Culture. Angelique is also director of the feminist LGBTI civil society organization, CAISO, Sex and Gender Justice in Trinidad and Tobago. For 2 decades, she has worked with social and environmental justice movements and civil society and community organizations regionally and internationally. Angelique is fiercely committed to intersectional queer feminist praxis, decolonial politics, and Black liberation. Her current research investigates Caribbean freedom, social movements, and decolonial poetics at the crossroads of migration and climate crisis and unsustainable development. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Yes. So to get this conversation started today, I wanted to ask a question that Nana and I have been kind of discussing. And so that first question for you is based on the fact that we know, based on our research and being Caribbean women, that Black women and gender expansive folks, they get their early information and knowledge from their communities, and that this knowledge is usually passed on through a gendered way. And that because it's community knowledge and because it's often gendered, that it is also often taken for granted. And so the question that I want to ask is, can you reflect on your earliest memories of knowledges and practices shared that are specific to climate change, specific to the environment, specific to climate rather, more so to the environment, and that you've learned from women and gender expansive folks in your communities? And we can go however you want.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, I like that.
So for me, I think my earliest memories were with hurricanes as it relates to climate change and environment. I can remember Hurricane Andrew back in 1992, and being in the bathroom with a loaf of bread with my sisters, because that was the most safe place in the home to be. And I grew up in a very female-centric household. So it was my grandmother, my mother, my 2 sisters, and I. And so my knowledge about hurricane preparation, how do you deal with hurricanes, et cetera, is very much influenced by my mother and grandmother. And from that, I think I've gotten this concept of, you prepare, you do what you need to do, you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and move on. During Hurricane Andrew, we were in the bathroom by ourselves because my grandmother was a nurse. And so she was at the hospital working, and she came home after the hurricane, rested, and then we got to work fixing up, what damages that we had around the place. So I think my perspective has been very much informed by that, practicality. You have to do what you have to do, and you have to do it by yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think for me, it's very, it would come back to conservation and what we would have learned growing up doing things like, I remember there was an English teacher I had whose pronouns were she and her, where she would tell us, all the girls in the class, one of the good things about showering is that you can collect all the water in a bucket and then use the water after to clean the bathroom or something like that. So that would be like a practice thing where we'd be like, oh, that's handy, but also why'd you really tell us? And then also like collecting plastic bags for shopping. So after shopping, before we had our big plastic ban here, my mother, she would go to the grocery store and she's on the chat now, so hi mom. But she would she would take plastic bags and put them in the plastic bag thing that I think a lot of us are familiar with doing, putting it under the sink, using the plastic bag as like garbage later on or something like that, just to have. And small things like that were like very, very normal in my house, just doing things to conserve. And then also gardening was really big among like my aunts and my mom. Like they were really big with gardening and growing your own food. They weren't always successful, but it was a really big thing that we wanted to do more of, subsistence farming.
Mhm. Mhm.
I can jump in. I feel like there's, you know, the Bahamian representation up in here is, you know, amazing because normally there's only one. If you can find a Bahamian. So I'm just appreciative of this, and I feel like similar. Um, uh, you know, I experienced, we grew up, hurricanes were just a regular all the time. I mean, of course, we felt the increase of them as the years went on. And I know we'll talk about Dorian, which was, I think, a really pivotal and changing moment in the conversation about climate change in our region. But for Bahamians and people growing up and living in the Bahamas, hurricanes are just, it's just a part of the everyday. So I think I agree around that. I think also for me growing up, water was always an issue. I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood in Baintown where we would regularly just not have water. We would regularly not have electricity because because of the tourism industry, and two, just because of the challenges of water on a small island where we shipped in water from Andros to Nassau and New Providence. And it was just a regular issue. And so that what we're hearing about this sort of, you know, saving, reusing, recycling, we didn't use those words. It was just literally a part of the everyday. My grandma had to constantly think about, well, how do we make sure we have enough? How do we save? How do we think about, you know, we use plants for medicine. We talked about plants as healing. We talked about, you know, it was out of a necessity, but I think it was also about, you know, a way of living. And I think, you know, we don't often talk about environmentalism or ecological relationships in that way. And, you know, I think I've said that a lot in my work, that we need to reevaluate how we talk about our relationship to nature and the environment, especially on small islands and in our Caribbean, and to prioritize the ways that we have long been in a relationship with the environment, with the earth, and with each other, mutual aid, sharing, you know, communities coming together in times of need. I think that that is a way of living that is very much rooted in the language of environmental justice, and even thinking about being, you know, environmental conservatism and things like that. And so I think it was just a part of it. Also, I think the practice of going for a sea bath was a really big part. We didn't live that far away, but, you know, we didn't have a car. And so when you could go to the sea, I remember my grandma and my mom both being, you know, very much like, this is a part of a special, you know, rejuvenation, healing experience. And I think those moments, you know, when I look back at them, I see it now differently and understand it differently. Even the stories of silk cotton trees, my grandma would share these stories about trees, and that really inspired my work in saltwater healing, where I felt like I had relationships with trees based on her stories. And so I think that really influenced me and how I thought about, and that knowledge that we pass on, you know, and how we understand and think about it now. I think is really important for us to really treasure those moments, and also talk about it differently, and talk about our knowledge and relationship with nature and land differently. I think there's a lot of lessons there for environmental movements that don't use the language of, you know, of the everyday, the ordinary, and also the ways that we reuse and recycle out of need and out of a common practice, and a kind of sensible way that you also want to be in relationship to nature.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, and similarly to everyone's, in St. Vincent around hurricane time, we would what I really enjoyed and would always remember, the togetherness. Everyone would sleeping in my mother's bed. And we won't watch television or anything. We would tell stories and read books. And prior to this, our mother would always put aside a tin of sardine, a tin of beef, say, save this for when hurricane come around. So, you know, this just shows that how a woman is always prepared for times like this. And yeah, my mother would always bring the girls to take part in this activity. And also when it comes to plants and gardening and so on, she instilled something in me. My grandmother instilled something in me that up to this day, I'm surrounded by plants, and I just love plants. I have to have plants in my office, and I teach my sons to love nature and to love plants, because we need them to breathe. It's important. So simple things like this, you know, help to teach our children viable lessons to save us in the long run.
Mhm. Yeah, as y'all were talking, when Nana and I were thinking about this question in particular, she asked me this question, and I told her, well, you know, Barbados, you know, we always say in Barbados that God must be a Bajan because we never used to get hurricanes before. Now we are getting hurricanes more often. But so I never really felt like we needed to prepare for hurricanes growing up, or for any changes in any type of climate activity or changes to the environment. But what I can remember is this saying that I can't remember the whole saying, but I know it starts with June too soon, something else, September to remember, and I think it was October all over. And basically it was a saying that was passed on, where it is that, you know, hurricane season is supposed to start in June, and by October it should be done. And that now what you're seeing is that those things aren't necessarily true anymore.
Yeah, so that means something is wrong.
That something is wrong. And I also remember when I had the red eyes, you know, red eyes be rampant in the Caribbean. When I had the red eyes growing up, that they would take me to the sea, and mommy is on here now, so she would know this too. They would take me to the sea and duck me in the ocean. Just duck me, duck you enough time, just duck you. And it's supposed to help with red eyes. And these were things that that were just second nature, that you used to sing as a child, June too soon, you know, and that you take for granted, but now you know that the weather patterns aren't sticking to those things that you learned as a child growing up. And so the other thing that we were talking about then is knowing these things and knowing where we are today. Are there ways in which you return to and honor or embody or embed these knowledges in your own praxis?
Okay, well, I'll dive in. Well, I said earlier that, you know, saltwater healing, my collection of poems and art, a chapbook, and also an art piece that I did that I actually exhibited in Nassau for Transforming Spaces for an exhibit around water. And, you know, that came out of this grappling with our relationship to nature, each other, and the earth, and also ancestors and painful memories. And I use the environment and nature and relationship with trees and the stories that my grandmother, I imagined the stories that my grandmother would tell me, you know, through this adult lens, and also through my memories of her, which are far away. She passed away when I was 18. And so I dug through these memories and I created this myth memoir of her, and she's really driving the story. And this young girl child is also grappling with that in saltwater healing. So it's literally a part of my creative practice, and I've consistently engaged and activated how we should think about you know, offering ways for us to understand those relationships in my works as a part of my creative and also my spiritual practice, which I infuse in my art. And so I really, what I wanted to do in that work and you know, my poetry and art is honor the ways that our ancestors have consistently taught us. There's so much there, and what we can also, if we listening to each other and listening to the earth, you know, so many of those messages are there. So I feel like it's a part of everything I do. It's a part of my research as well. It's, you know, some of the most pressing issues of our time are wrapped up in our relationships to the earth and to each other. And so I think it's everywhere. I also, for me, reclaiming in a way the kind of practices, the spiritual practices that I now understand as Obeah. When I was a child, I didn't understand it in that way. And Christianity, you know, complicates our relationships and understandings to spiritual practices. But I also see that now as a part of my own spiritual practice and understanding of my ancestors and my immediate ancestors, the work that they did to sustain us, you know, to sustain our families. And I think about that in a long way of what we did as, you know, people of African descent to sustain ourselves and our families and literally our lives, and how we passed on that knowledge. So just thinking about bush medicine, you know, we're reclaiming it now, and you see, you know, it's celebrated in different ways, and it's being packaged and sold in ways that sometimes are uncomfortable, but we know that these recipes come from very long relationships with the land, passing down of knowledge. And I think that is one place too that, you know, we have to remember that that's, you know, that comes from our passing down of knowledge and different stories of healing. And so I think it's infused through all of my work, but I wanted to also highlight those things that I think are, you know, stretch across our region as well. Thanks. Who am I passing it on to?
I think it's me next. Yeah, I think kind of to piggyback on your point though, Angelique, I think subconsciously for me, one of the things that I do outside of the science part so much is focus holistically on the community part of where we go with this practice, because you can't, especially with climate change, right? One of the things that I really am trying to push more into the narrative is how this is a collective responsibility that we all have. So we have to live more communally, live at peace with each other. I grew up in a large family, and a lot of the women in my family pushed for us to really be together and connect with family members and other parts of our community. So in things that I do now, where I work and how I've worked in the past, I've always been trying to build community among people. And also because I'm an educator in this field, like it's really important to me that I break it down in a way that all members can understand and empower them. Right? So they have this knowledge that they can use going forward. And also look for ways that we can integrate my knowledge with their knowledge to try to package the information in a way that makes a lot of sense to them. And also just, it's easier to practice ways of like conservation or soil testing, or even just practicing their own citizen science, or doing things that are economically beneficial for them that are also good for the environment. Just having those big conversations with community and empowering people is another way I think I take that into my practice. And I hope that I am successful in doing that as well.
Yeah, so one of the programs that Red Root SVG has is the backyard gardening program. Due to COVID, it has been delayed, but I see the importance of teaching people to grow their own and to eat what they grow and so on. So, and nowadays, a lot of people aren't really farming. People are more into fast food and so on. And this is why they are developing so many, you know, like diabetes and hypertension. So climate change, intertwined with everything, with health and wellness and so on. So with this, we will be educating these women on environmental change, climate change, and also how to plant their own food, and to pass this on to the children so that it can have some sort of continuity with it.
For me, I mean, I think my experiences with climate and experiences with women in climate and environment has shaped my whole career trajectory. So, that's the foundation for why I do the type of research that I do, why I do research on climate change, knowing who is most vulnerable to it. I think I've expanded from looking specifically at Bahamas to looking more broader at Caribbean and then also Pacific SIDS, because, small islands in general, we're so at risk. And I think it's so important that we have women in these fields doing research on this and having that small island perspective. So I think that whole being born and raised and growing up, and experiencing these things firsthand and then knowing that it's going to get worse has informed all of the work that I do. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. I'm really grateful for the conversation that these first questions just generated, because I asked Andrea before, because I think that there's a way in particular NGOs, international NGOs in particular, package climate change and resilience as if it's something to be transported to different spaces, as if practices were not already there. And I think that's really just hearing these very real conservation practices of farming, agricultural sustainability is really impactful. And I'm grateful that also, Adelle, you left us with a piece where you talked about women influencing all the work that you do. So I wanted to ask of all of you, just your origins into this work. What brought you to your work, and any significant moments that you felt that shaped, this is what commits me to climate and environmental resilience and change?
So a few things brought me to this. Recently, I have observed that we have a lot of seaweed on our beaches, and this is affecting tourism, and is affecting us local enjoying the beach, and the scent is really not, healthy. So looking at this is a sign that something is definitely wrong and something needs to be done about it. Another thing is that my grandmother always loved planting stuff, and she loved farming, and she taught me how to repot flowers, to maintain them with them twice a day. And this love for nature was embedded in me from small. So now I'm seeing the changes, and the earth is destroying and so on. It makes me want to do something about it, because this is my love. I grow this inside of me. So that little interaction with my grandmother helped me to fall in love with climate and nature even more. Yeah, so that's where that stems
from. For me, I've been working on climate change issues from 2007. That's when I first started graduate school, and I went into graduate school thinking that I was going to do sustainable tourism, because tourism is such a big industry for us in the region. And my graduate advisor, who was a woman, she said, I think you should take a look at climate change, because your islands are not going to be around to have any tourism. And that completely changed my trajectory in what I researched and what I focused on. And I've been working on climate change in small island developing states since then. It has been a very frustrating, depressing at times, making you angry, all types of emotions that you feel when you're from one of these places where the research is telling you it's not going to be here in 100 years or less. And so that has taken an emotional toll on me. And I have at times felt that I maybe should do something else. But I think more recently, the 2019 Hurricane Dorian really recommitted me to climate change. My grandparents' home where they retired in Grand Bahama was completely swept away by Dorian. There's nothing left, no foundation, nothing. And I was like, wow, these things that we were projecting would occur in the year 2100 are happening now. And so it really recommitted me to focusing on climate change in a small island context. So that's sort of my background to it.
For me, it's so funny because like Adele said, like, yeah, you get really emotional. It's very hard. Like I literally every day I'm on the job. And I tell people like, worst case scenario is my job. Like that's what I do. That's just part of it. Working in this field. But for me, when I was young, I really wanted to be a planeteer from the Captain Planet, like so badly. Like I was one of those. Like I was convinced I was going to like chain myself to a tree at some point to make sure they didn't cut down like a tree in like a big park or something. Like that's how committed I was to it. And it wasn't until I got to university. Well, I learned about the ozone layer in high school and I was like, this is cool. But when I got to university and I did environmental science, like an intro for the first time, I really was like, okay, this is really great. And then the weird hurricane patterns that happened that followed me up to Connecticut because I was very dramatic in thinking that. But just hurricanes hit in Connecticut, I was like, what is going on? Like everything I'd known about hurricanes, maybe I don't have a full grasp on them. And then the next year, Hurricane Sandy hit Connecticut, New Jersey. And I was like, this superstorm thing, what is going on? I didn't have a complete understanding of that. So it felt like a really immediate need for me to study hurricanes and like what climate change was and how those two things would intersect, especially being from a place that's often hit by hurricanes. What does that mean? So for me, it was just an immediate, this is what I'm going to do. So that was where that was my inspiration there, really.
For me, I remember being a young person growing up in the Bahamas and already feeling like I had this connection to nature and to the environment and to animals. And, I didn't think of that as a job or anything because there are two choices. You go into tourism and service industry or banking. And I actually did both for a long time before I went to university. And I really wanted to be a marine biologist, actually. I love the sea so much. I wanted to be a part of, of being around the sea all the time. And then I started reading about animal rights, and I actually got really heavily involved in animal rights activism. As a young person in the Bahamas, we were protesting live dolphin capture. I might be a bit older than some of my fellow Bahamians here, but this was like in the late 80s, early 90s. In the early 90s, there were lots of conversations about dolphins being captured in Bahamian waters for Blue Lagoon and for these other, hotel exhibits. And there were a lot of protests against this. There was a lot of work around cats and dogs being neutered and spaded, and I also did work around that. And so some of my early work was really rooted in that, and that was my connection to environmental movements and attention around the climate. And I actually became a vegetarian at 15 because I read about and learned from people that I was living with at the time how important it was, like the singular thing you could do, right, in terms of your carbon footprint. So I became a political eater. And just to share too, at about 13 or 14, I think I was in grade 9, I did a research paper. Yeah, I think it was for right around the BJC period, I think so. That was grade 9. I wrote an article about sea turtles. I did research. I typed, it was before, I typed it on a typewriter and I sent it to the Nassau Guardian. Was it the Guardian? I'm pretty sure. And I actually got it published. And the title of it was something like how, sea turtles and their struggle to survive in an unkind world. And that was the first thing I wrote about. And, it wasn't until I went into university that I started to make all of the connections between environmental and social justice. And I was like, oh, we treat each other like this because, well, we treat the earth and animals the way we do because look at how we've treated each other historically. And so that's when I started to make the connections and become much more in the social justice and environmental justice movements and figured out my stuff. So, that's my origins around that. And I think, so then for me, from then, like, Adele and Marjahn, it's always been a part of my work, my research. The environment and the climate crisis have always been a part of what I write about. And, the unpopular, critique that I offer of tourism in my work, people don't want to hear it. But I'm like, tourism is bad for culture, it's bad for people, and it's bad for the environment. It's a trifecta. And how can we create a more sustainable version of it is my big question, in my work. And I argue that that's almost impossible. I also want to just share that I did work in Haiti after the earthquake, and that was another area in my own growth as an activist and a writer, where I worked with a group of women from with roots in the Caribbean and in Haiti, and we created a local diaspora solidarity exchange, and it was really rooted in supporting farmers and teachers and artists. And so a lot of that kind of intersectional work that we think about, it was all a part of IT Resurrect. We did that for almost 7 years, working within a community called Nkomye, and learning from them, because we also wanted to create a model where it wasn't like we were coming in with all these ideas. We literally wanted to bring in resources and create these exchanges to support the community there. And that taught me so much, and that's really influenced and impacted my work.
Thank you all for that. I also wanted just to hold, like, there were just so many things that resonated in terms of emotions, frustrations, joy. Everything just sounds like deeply rooted in a care and love for family and island and region. And so as you recall your time throughout your work, what are some significant changes that you've observed? And in particular is related to response to the change in environment. And I'm thinking in particular around governmental response, because I think that many times there's the work that the advocates and the research scientists do and push for the better of society. And oftentimes that's not what's necessarily implemented. So I just wanted to know more about experiences over time.
So in relation to the government, I've noticed that they have placed more trash bins. They now have recycling. Some countries have laws against putting like plastics in the garbage bin, and they now ban plastic bags from shopping. So this is just some of the things that I see, some of the steps that all the governments of St. Vincent have been taking. In relation to Red Root, there is this project that we have been planning on embarking on the beach cleanup, because a lot of persons would normally use the beach and they would litter and end up in the ocean and affects the marine life and so on. So one of the most important thing is to always have like beach cleanup, and to get people involved, we would normally have like competitions, like beach cleanup competitions, which area has the best, well designed, you plant a tree and so on. So that's some of the ways in which, we implement things to combat climate change.
I think I'd say, and Adele, please come in and just correct me wherever I may be wrong in this, but I'm kind of green in it, where I would say that I think for government and in terms of understanding the full enormity of climate change, there is a lot of lack of understanding of what it is. On from a political front, it's harder for them to fully grasp the seriousness of the crisis. And that's kind of reflected in the policy and education and the literature that's put out again about climate change. There's not enough media attention, I feel, to discuss things. Like when the worst happens is when the conversations are had, not necessarily when we could prepare beforehand. And I find that to be one of the most frustrating parts of working this job, because the information is there. We have folks on the ground who have been doing this work. It's just not taken seriously until something happens, where it's kind of just like, how do we mitigate and adapt to the current crisis that we're experiencing if we're not taking the present science, the present information in front of us and trying to do something with that?
Yeah, I just want to, oh, Adele, you want to go? Oh, okay, I just want to co-sign on everything you just said as well, because I don't think anyone's doing enough. Let's just be really frank. No one anywhere, no countries are doing enough. There's no governments that have enacted the right policies. There's nothing happening. I mean, we've raised the alarm. Scientists have been raising the alarm, and we're still here, where the reality is that we are in serious crisis. Everything that the studies are saying is that we, as Adele said, right, we thought this stuff was going to happen in 2040, 2060. It's happening now. And the most recent report is even raising more alarms about the heat in the ocean and the level of crisis we're in. But I don't think any governments, much less our governments in the Caribbean region, that are pressed. They are confined by structural adjustment policies. They're confined by global north, multinational corporate relationships that have really put our countries in a double bind, especially around tourism development. So I don't think there's nothing that I could say that has significantly changed. The minor things around issues of recycling. What I see again and again here in Trinidad and Tobago, and I think across the region, are just very targeted consumer practices. Oh, you individual consumers are so terrible. We need to recycle. We need to do, but there is no amount of recycling. There is no amount of changes we can make on an individual level or even the household level that is going to mitigate what we're facing. It has to be done in a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach where governments, multinational corporations, the polluters, the big, massive industry polluters who've created the problem that we're in, and the fossil fuel industry. Those are the big changes we need. And I think we make a mistake in environmental movements when we target individual consumers, because that is not going to make the difference. And I do think that we need go. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do those things. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that it has to be multifaceted. And I really worry, here in Trinidad and Tobago, we've had massive amounts of flooding every year. And, media, government officials get on and blame people. Oh, you're putting garbage and, water can't go through. There's not proper drainage. But no one is talking about, well, who built and developed places where there isn't a proper drainage? What about the huge developers who are building on lands that shouldn't have been built upon? Where's the regulation around that? Why are we not protecting our mangroves? We see this happening in Jamaica. Mangroves were protected from the 1970s, and then they built a highway And then all of the regulations that were there in Jamaica because of the pressures of a global tourism industry, then all of a sudden the mangroves can be destroyed. So we also see places where we have laws and policies that get discarded the minute there's a new development scheme or plan. And I think that's the problem. And we heard at the Prime Minister of the Bahamas some years ago said, we don't have a plan B, right? When Bahama was failing, I was like, we don't have a plan B. I mean, that is literally the problem. We only are looking at these solutions to economic development and futures that are not sustainable. And so I think that's the problem there. So it's hard for me to even identify anything. Sure, we can bring up some of these changes in policies, but frankly, they've done nothing, and we need serious global solutions. And I don't want us to sit around and blame ourselves anymore.
You're correct. But what they can change policies, they can make laws, but it all comes down to individuals, because even though yes, the big companies and so on are helping to pollute the air and the earth tremendously, but persons, individual themselves, most persons, I say like 90% of us, we litter, we do something unknowingly to destroy the earth. Those simple things that we do. And I think that persons aren't really interested in climate change. They're not really, they don't understand where we are in terms of how much we are destroying the earth. Enough awareness. We are not making persons aware that this is serious, and the little things we do is affecting us. I cannot litter, but I would be traveling and I would see persons just throwing plastic outside, like nobody doing this, and this, it hurts, because you can't go around telling everybody, stop littering, and some people just don't care. And it's whether we like it or not, it goes back to how we are being trained at home, and the values. So persons aren't really parents, teachers, they aren't really teaching our children the importance of climate change, because these children are the future, and maybe this is somewhere where we're supposed to start, educating our children about climate change and how important it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all of you. I think individual action is important, and also global scale and national action is important, and we need all of it. I like what Phylicia was saying about education, which I think is critical, because at the individual, the household, the community level, we need to put pressure on governments to do more, to respond. So what Angelique was saying about, prioritizing economic development over our continued sustainability, we as people need to hold government accountable and be like, we don't want this project, we don't support this project, we don't want those maid jobs and waiter jobs that are going to come with the tourism development, because we're not going to have an island. So I think it's both important, for individual and government and international action. Some changes that I've seen in my time, I remember I came back to Bahamas at the University of Bahamas in 2012, and I thought I was going to be working on adaptation and policies and how are we planning for climate change. And they wanted me to be part of a debate as to whether climate change was real or not. And my mind was blown. I was like, how am I coming back to university? It was College of Bahamas. And we are at a place in 2012 where we're debating, is climate change real or not? So that was eye-opening to me in the level of public education that needed to happen around climate change. I will say that I have seen some changes since then. I think Hurricane Dorian was a big eye opener for the Bahamas in particular, to see that climate change is real. It's happening now. It's affecting us. I think people still think that climate change is only hurricanes, and they're not aware of all of the other hazards, sea level rise, all of this stuff. I think on a regional scale, when we have these big, extreme events, these hurricanes, when you think about the 2017 Maria and Irma and all of those, it brings climate change more to the fore. And then we see governments talking more about it. But I agree with Angelique in that what they have done so far is not enough. It doesn't respond to the level of risks that we are facing. And we need to be doing much more.
Yes, all of that, both and. And I wanted to kind of keep this conversation going about the impacts, but I wanted to get more into, like, we had a question already by Amina, who's asking specifically about gender justice and climate justice. And so one of the questions that we had for you was, how have these changes specifically, we're talking about what the government is not doing, what we need to do more. And so maybe it would be helpful to talk about what exactly is happening, right? So how has these issues around climate change and environmental change, how have they specifically been causing disruption, destruction in our communities, to our economies, to our social and familiar infrastructures? How have these changes impacted women, gender expansive folks with disabilities, folks from the working class? And so how is climate change, going back to Amina's question as well, how is climate change wrapped up in the fight for gender justice?
So in April this year, St. Vincent experienced its volcanic eruption. The eruption of the La Sofia volcano, 40 years after its second eruption. And a few weeks after the eruption, we had heavy rainfall. And because this rainfall was not just, it was unique in that, because of all the ash that was already on the terrain, causes landslides and persons to lose their houses, even in the green zone, the safe areas. So we have had about 20,000 persons being displaced due to the eruption of the volcano. And the majority of these persons are women and children. Due to this, women have been, women have been in situation where they are abused. Children are in situation where they're abused. Some persons lost their job because of the whole island got affected. So, it was COVID, it was dengue, and now the volcano eruption and the flooding. So, we were just getting lashed one after the other. And most of the persons who are employed are women. Most of the persons who have to take care of the family. So you would see women at the forefront in the hospitals, giving out reliefs. In, like, for example, in our organization that has only women, we were out there distributing food packages, clothing, ensuring that persons were safe, and so on. So when it comes to climate change, women are always the ones that are most affected, and they have to be the ones who has to take up the mantle and try to do something about it while protecting themselves and their family. So yeah, this year has proven that this is really in fact true, because we haven't had an experience like this. Like, I haven't had an experience like this. It was 40 years since the volcano erupted, so this was my first experience with something like this. And you know, it wasn't a good experience, and the after effects is what, you know, is what hurts. It's not the physical destroying of the country, but you know, what the emotional scars it has left on our women and children who ended up in vulnerable situations because of climate change. Yeah.
Well, exactly. If, you know, communities that are marginalized before a disaster are going to continue to experience inequalities, and we still very much live in unequal societies when it comes to gender, race, sexuality, class, migration status. And so you have communities, if you were vulnerable before a disaster or before the impacts and the effects of climate change, then of course you're going to experience that. And so I think, you know, understanding how we have to fight for all forms of social and environmental justice simultaneously helps us to think about that, because we can see the ways that communities, different communities are impacted. And so it's even simply at the level of preparation, right? How are you prepared for and I'm going to say unnatural disasters, right? How are we prepared for changes in the environment and climate? How are communities prepared? And if there's no, the whole question about mitigation, I think that's one place that the states that in which we live and work, that we have to hold states and governments accountable around those very plans, because there is a responsibility to ensure that people have access to safety and that we're thinking about the different inequalities that people experience. And I want to just highlight too that, as Phylicia was saying, women do the majority of care work. And so when different issues happen, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's flooding, extreme weather, whether we see the impacts of, sea level rise on fisheries, or the ways that people can, have a livelihood which affects agriculture, all of this is going to disproportionately impact women and communities that have a direct relationship, whether you're, working week to week, whether you're daily wage earners, whether you're dependent upon, quite literally that week to week work, or you're dependent on a tourism economy. And any shock that happens is going to impact the communities that are already struggling. And so I think we absolutely have to think about, we have to have a gender analysis, we have to have a class analysis, and we have to have a really clear, that intersectional feminist analysis when we do this work. And I think that's the things that has created our inability to talk about the individual, the communal, and the global, because we're not thinking about it in that way. And even when we think about, I've argued in my work that, the class politics around the environmental movement has really left out a bunch of people to be able to talk and communicate about these issues. So I think it's, it's a failure at the state level, but it's also a failure in terms of who movements include. And I just want to give a shout out to Esther Figueroa's work in the documentary Jamaica for Sale, and all of her short films highlighting issues, working class issues, intersectional issues with the environment. And she highlights and showcases communities that are literally on the front lines of climate crisis. And we have so many of that across our region. And I think we have to amplify the work of folks who are doing that kind of analysis, so that it comes up and we can affect the kinds of changes in terms of policy and the big kinds of changes that we want to highlight. And yes, someone has put a link for Jamaica for Sale. I teach about these issues with my students. I make sure that the climate crisis is absolutely connected to sexual and reproductive health and rights, to LGBTI rights and justice, to gender justice, to policy. So I make sure that it's across the board, and I think that's the kind of approach we need.
Yes. Thank you both so much for that. Wait, actually, am I jumping the gun? Andrea. Oh, okay. Yes. I wanted to now have some questions for Adelle and Marjahn specifically. I wanted to know if you could share just what your work within the research science as a research scientist involves, and how you've been able to center, in particular, Caribbean women and girls in your work, and what role has education and awareness building played in your work as well?
Go, Marjahn. So my work, let's see, so climate action has been broken down into three main categories. You have mitigation, which is trying to reduce greenhouse gases. You have adaptation, trying to reduce the impacts of climate change. And then you have loss and damage, which are actually the negative impacts of climate change that are then experienced. And so my work focuses a lot on adaptation and on loss and damage, which are critically important for the Caribbean. I think the global agenda has really been pushing mitigation as something that we should be focused on, but as you know, we contribute less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Meanwhile, we are disproportionately at risk to the impacts and are already feeling the impacts. And so I advocate for attention, funds, support to be paid to adaptation and loss and damage. And as Angelique was saying, you know, research shows who's most affected by climate impacts. It doesn't affect everyone equally. Those who are already marginalized are doubly marginalized by climate change. And so by focusing on adaptation and loss and damage, I'm focusing on these marginalized communities in particular. And just picking up on some of that gender justice and climate justice in my work in the region, working with governments on adaptation planning, there is very little acknowledgement that we have gender issues in the Caribbean. They will get vexed with you when you bring up that we need to look at the gendered aspects of climate change and say, well, we don't have problems with gender here, right? And so my work has really been trying to unpack how climate change affects men and women, boys and girls differently. And then also how adaptation projects that we put into place have gendered impacts. So if you get some funding, some international funding, and you say you're going to do an adaptation project to help farmers and fishers, and 90% of the people in your project are men, then you're not helping to deal with the impacts of climate change that women are facing. And so I've sort of been also looking at that, like how can we make sure that our responses to climate change aren't further deepening those inequities that we see between men and women. And with Dorian, just the whole disaster response to Dorian, the deportation of Haitian migrants after saying that they could come for assistance, I think really shows that gender justice, climate justice needs to be an integral part of climate action that we do in response to climate change.
Thank you, Adelle. That was great. I think one of the things that so in my work, really, my experience really holds a lot, where most of the time in the international community, I have been the only Black, only woman, only Black woman, only Caribbean person, only foreigner in the room, right? So for a lot of times, my work, working in the physical science of actually like climate modeling and like having these big discussions and like what would happen if a hurricane hit, if a hurricane was in just water and there was no land. We have all these scenarios to try to figure out what the science would look like, but we don't really put the people behind the science, like who's going to be affected, right? So where I'm in the room, a lot of the time I've had to have conversations and remind people, there are people who live on those islands. Like we actually exist. And as a woman, that has been difficult, because in this field, in climate change, which is not surprising in any science really, it is a really white, male, cisgendered field. So as a person who doesn't fall into those categories, it's kind of hard to get your point across anyway, and doing that. So in my work now, I've done a lot of work trying to educate young girls, of course, young boys as well, but really pushing girls who intern under me, who work with me as an apprentice. Like I always try to mentor young girls wherever I am, especially young Black girls here, young Bahamian girls, trying to push them forward and to get an idea of this is what they want to do, and pushing them into the science, really. That is, my biggest goal is to see more diverse stories, more diverse people behind the stories and narrative of what climate change looks like. Because to Adelle's point, like there's a book out that's, I can't remember the author's name, but I think it's called Invisible Women, where we are pretty much invisible in a lot of things, really. Like an example they expressed was like, when it comes to gender neutrality and talking about gender neutral things, like the word doctor, the first thing you think of is a man. You say the word nurse, the first thing you think of is a woman. Like we as women in general, we get kind of put to the side in a lot of things. So pushing ourselves, not really pushing ourselves, but like fighting the system, really, to put ourselves forward and bring others with us. That's really my own goal, to try to hope for more of that. So there's more visibility and more conversations that are being had that think about the people who live on the small islands in the big climate models.
Thank you both for that, because I think one of the things, I think it is necessary to take a pause and sort of talk about like what was like motivating and sort of the conceptualization of this program was response to hurricanes or response to extreme weather in Barbados, but also thinking through how ultimately, and I remember as Andrea and I were planning this, we were working on working on a proposal as well for some research. And I remember combing through all of the different just authors, all the different organizations all throughout the region, all the work that was being done, and very clearly coming majority from Black women. And for me, that's when it clicked, and I already knew, but I was like, this is the danger of what happens when you have policies at larger levels that are implemented that are like just deeply informed by colonial legacies, but also racism and sexism. No one is listening. We're living in a time where we have a prime minister in Barbados who's a woman who's phenomenal, Mia Mottley, who's constantly at the UN and speaking to what you all spoke to now. This is more about global responsibility. And there's so much avoidance of that. And once again, I suspect, and I'm pretty sure racism, sexism, colonial heritages are legacy as well. So I wanted to take some time to just name that and really just sit with everything that you shared, and also just ask a very real question of you both. As you navigate these different spaces as research scientists, whether it's governmental or intergovernmental space, how are you navigating action or lack thereof, and this call for 1.5 to stay alive? Because it's very real. There have been several moments where they're just like throughout this program, like if we don't move, we're not going to have islands, So I just wanted to learn more about how you've been navigating that.
I would say for me, I don't say I'm navigating it no, I wouldn't say not well, but I would say there is obstruction. It's harder. There's a lot of trying to get the information out is already kind of difficult in a sense. And if you're not working in a kind of, if you're not working at a university level or a private educational facility, it's not really coming out. It's harder to try to communicate in these spaces where people are really just learning the language or just learning and understanding not necessarily the crisis, but the moment before the crisis. Because for a lot of folks and a lot of people who work in these spaces that need to be shouting from the rooftops and getting the information out, the information is limited. So it's hard to try to say we're at point C when everyone's still kind of at point A. So we're still trying to pull people along. I think this year we finally got our Department of Environmental Planning and Protection to be a department versus just like a consultancy for the government. So for them, they're trying to build, and we're trying to tell them at the same time, listen, I see that you're getting yourself sorted, and that's great, but we're gonna sink. What do we do now? And trying to deal with that kind of like back and forth is already kind of difficult. It's just, for me coming back home, I found a lot of difficulty trying to, like, I met the community, I've had conversations with folks, and I found it was like very difficult to get the language and the seriousness and the urgency of the situation out there. So it's harder than I had anticipated, I would say that.
For me, I'll talk about my experiences working intergovernmentally and internationally as a small island focused climate change person. So the IPCC and these reports, the 1.5 report, the AR6 report that's come out, it's like you have to push for them to pay attention to small islands, right? Because we have small populations relative to other places, then number one, the research that's out there, we don't have as much research. It looks as if we're not impacted as much, because if you go by number of people impacted, then it looks like it's not that much. And you have to it's a constant fight to make sure that small islands are highlighted. These are people that are most affected. They're already being affected. They may not be there. And it's a constant push. It's also hard because you're talking about your home, right? So other researchers, they can be in this, this space where they're just speaking scientifically, or they're just talking about this study. And I'm like, this is my home. These are my people, right? This is real life stuff. And I think that's really hard to deal with emotionally. I think, I've been doing a lot since Zoom and all of this, talking on panels and speaking with people, and it's difficult talking about this stuff, and it takes a toll. So I think all of that I've experienced with this whole 1.5 to stay alive, and getting people to realize that that's actually real. It's not a slogan, right? So when the new AR6 report came out and it was like, we may not limit to 1.5, and everyone's like, oh, I'm like, that's a big deal for us. That's existential for us, and trying to repeatedly push that it has absolute consequences is something that I've been focused on, which has been incredibly taxing. And so I agree with Marjahn that we need more people to be in this fight, because it is a fight. Yeah.
This is such a great conversation. It's already sparking so many questions by the audience, which we will get to soon, we promise. And I think we just have really one more question, because, I agree with you. It is our home, Adelle. It is our home. I might not live there right now, but my mother lived there. My sister lived there. My niece lived there. My friends lived there. Barbados can't sink. It can't, like, you know what I'm saying? And, I'm listening to my mother say, it is hot. It is hot. It is extremely hot. The last time I went home, it was sargassum all over the place. You can't swim in the ocean. There's just so many things that you can see changes happening. When Hurricane Elsa hit Barbados this summer as a Category 1 hurricane, it damaged my parents' homes. I've never, and Mommy can correct me if I'm wrong, but their homes were never damaged by hurricanes before. And so I want to end by giving you the opportunity, because I feel it when you say that is home, right? So I want to give you the opportunity to say something about how do we move forward? What would you like to leave with the audience? What would you like the audience to, if there was one plea, if there was one thing you could say to the people who are listening, what would that thing be?
I think early in the conversation, Angelique, Phylicia, and Adelle made a really good point on basically how we need everything going on for like pushing for corporations to do less greenhouse emissions, because that is a big deal. Also taking individual responsibility to educate and like learn more about protecting your environment, which also affects the climate. And also just, I think those two things come together through a collective responsibility, right? So for us, we contribute less than 1% of greenhouse gases, but imagine if we contribute less than 1%. If we could make a community effort where, take for example, I know my family's watching this, so I'll say, we recycle cans in our house now. And then my dad goes and tells my uncle that we recycle cans, he should do it too. And they word of mouth do the same thing, you know? It's just a matter of like saying as a community, once that word of mouth spread that we should do this one thing together, then there are less cans being used or more cans being recycled. And there's an impact there that we can see. And at the same time, you know, I work with young people who are very vivacious and ready to fight for like lowering emissions and talking and yelling at big corporations, not yelling, but protesting big corporations, encouraging young people and encouraging people to protest. I think it's still, the power of protest is big. So the collective responsibility that we deserve to be alive. So we should protest that and claim our rights to do that, and also have collective responsibility with each other. We should take care of each other, and we should also find solutions for climate change together versus make it in one individual thing. I think that would be a huge deal.
Okay, so everybody is important. I am so happy that you're doing your work. Angelique is doing her work. Adelle is doing her work. Everybody is doing their part in combating climate change. So, and everybody is important. So I believe in educating persons and enough. We can never educate enough. I think that we need to make people aware of what is happening, because people aren't aware. We are in relaxed mode. Until something big happened, then you see people start scrambling. Like what we were doing when the Soufre erupted, you know, they had traffic jams because persons did not see it fit, the officials did not see it fit to have us evacuate like 48 hours before to you know, so preparedness and readiness and educating. So, and we all have to do this together. So I do it through educating, workshops and projects. You do it through research. We all have to do something. And I want to say again that we can change all the policy we want, but you know, there is this thing called the unconscious bias. Even though we have all the rules that say persons don't litter, persons don't do this, when nobody is watching, they're gonna do it because it is inside them. So another thing is that I believe that changing a woman, educating a woman is educating a whole community, and that is why we go after women. We start with the women, because though women are the one who build the community, who educate the family, who educate the children, and that route would really help to bring change. So the last word, I know that is last words. I would want to say is communicating. So we can always have these workshops. We can always have these seminars and these forums, but we might not reach the persons who really want to reach, because of the way that we are communicating to them. You understand what I'm saying? So those persons who might not finish school, they will not want to sit down and listen to you know, us having a conversation. You know, they will get turned off and go away. So it's just like we are talking amongst ourselves. because we are not coming out of our bubble to meet, the persons who really need to know. Because everybody, this is important for everybody, and we need everybody on board in order to really make a change, in order to see a difference. That's it.
We deserve to be alive. I mean, someone just wrote that in the chat, Alexandra. So emphasizing that point. I think that education, of course, is key, greater public awareness. And I think we need to be outraged. We are not outraged enough. We need to let go of respectability politics, and we need to demand better of our leaders. We need to demand better of the private sector, and we need to literally take back the spaces where we can voice our concerns and, be really, really outrageously outraged is what we need to be. And I think, we need to work on, of course, multiple fronts, but I also think that it is up to us to take back our resistance, our forms of resistance. Our region, we have long histories and herstories of rebellion and resistance, and I want to see more of that. And I also want to say that we need more empathy and care, because I think one of the things that happened, after Hurricane Dorian, I mean, it was so heartbreaking to not be able to go home and help. And so I wrote about it and I did my best. I also had elder family in Grand Bahama who lost a lot, and their home was not destroyed fully, but a lot of it was destroyed. And just dealing with that and then seeing the treatment of Haitian migrants. I mean, you had this moment where, are we coming together? And we could see how those things fall apart. And so I want us to have greater empathy and care for each other and build a regional solidarity. How do we turn to each other across the region? How do we create regional mutual aid and conversations and think about our climate action regionally and become that force and partner with the Pacific Islands? The Pacific Islands are going through exactly what we are. And so I do think we need more global South-South relations and interdependence. So we're not relying on the global North. We're not relying on their funding. We're not relying on their structural adjustment policies and their loans, and just figure out a different way. I think we're at a point where we have limited choices. And so I think it's now or never. And I'm just calling on all of us to do wherever we are and whatever work we do, create that attention, raise the alarm, create conversations, figure out ways that we can do this work together, and think about how we can bring our voices together and demand the change that we need.
You all said everything that I was going to say. So I fully agree with all of you. It's all about collective action, advocacy. We need allies. We need people outside of the Caribbean who are not Caribbean to say we Caribbean people deserve to be alive. And so we need to do things to make sure that happens. So I think people can do what they can do, right? So you could protest. If you're a protester, you can tweet. If that's what you do, you can go out and talk to people if that's what you can do. But I think just really to underscore what Marjahn, Phylicia, and Angelique said, we need everybody to be doing something. Time is running out. We may really not be here. And so the time to act is now. And that's it for me.
Thank you all so much. We wanted to take just two questions from the audience. And so I'll give them to you. Anybody can feel free to answer. It's not for everyone, but there was a question about the impacts of climate injustice, in particular on trans and non-binary folks living in the region. And also a lot of people have been considering or asking, what can the diaspora, the Caribbean diaspora, maybe African diaspora do and support? You all have named some things, but I think folks wanted to know, especially a part of the Caribbean diaspora, how can they be involved?
Nobody want to take the question?
Oh, Hi, sorry, my screen was stuck. I want to say, I think we addressed this a bit earlier by saying that any marginalized or oppressed group are absolutely impacted by the climate crisis. And I think that LGBTIQ plus folks, non-binary and trans folks in particular, already experience so much and just levels of discrimination. And so it's just one other part of the hierarchy of the list of the intersectional list of experiences, right? And I think that LGBTQI communities, my experience in Trinidad and Tobago, living in Trinidad and Tobago and working on LGBTIQ activism, we show up for all the movements. We show up for, every single, like there's a protest around something, we show up. And I think it's a part of that experience of feeling marginalization on so many fronts, that the movements around human rights and social justice and environmental justice are so, clear and evident. But I do think that a lot of it is invisible. I don't think that we've had any clear, if we're looking for research, any clear research that could say these are the ways that climate crisis is impacting different LGBTIQ communities. But certainly there's been a lot of work on gender and climate change. And so we have that work. And I guess I also wanted to share a bit about the question about diaspora. I think amplifying the work of these two brilliant scientists we have here with us, and and the communities, the environmental justice movements, and any of the civil society organizations that are doing work around climate action and climate justice, sharing writings about these issues. I think that's a way we can amplify and raise the alarm, across the diaspora, and think about how we support each other in that process. And I think listening to each other and really privileging the voices of those, I think we have to amplify, folks who are living on the front lines, and folks, especially across the Latin American and Caribbean region. We have so many First Peoples and Indigenous folks who've been doing this activism. And I think we should be a part of calling out the ways that governments have been silencing environmental defenders and human rights defenders, and that those things are inextricably linked, right? And also, advocating for migrant rights. I think all of those things are connected, and that's the kind of work that I'm doing in my new book, where I want to confront these issues of migration, sexual politics, and climate.
Thank you, Angelique. I think one of the things that Angelique touched on, which is really important for the diaspora, and also kind of to bring it back to trans and non-binary people, I think in terms of this field, in terms of this 1.5 to stay alive and everything going on, I think we really need to remember that the folks behind the narrative, really, with climate change, we have a lot of researchers that work from the global north. We have a lot of researchers from the global north. We have a lot of folks who work in science who are in the global north, whose perspectives are very skewed and focused on what will happen in the global north and the global south as a benefit to the global north, not necessarily. And we've seen it with COVID, kind of, where these countries that we live in, the global south, is a tourist destination in the middle of a pandemic. And people are sick and people are dying. And one of the things that I was inspired by seeing a lot on Twitter and all over social media is folks saying, hey, this is giving Columbus energy, don't do this. So if we can have more of those conversations and seeing more people who want to jump into these fields, who are of the Caribbean diaspora, African diaspora, who identify as trans, even, because I feel like there is a giant stigma in science where if you identify an LGBTQ IA+, that there's a lot of difficulty for you, especially if you fall and you happen to be Black as well. You have the space and you should be there. You deserve to be there. And your voice is extremely valid. Like, I found that in my experience, and I'd hope to find more people who feel comfortable here to have conversations with folks like me and Adele who are in the Bahamas, to actually champion for us in those conversations with scientists in the global north. This is why you need to focus on the people who live on those little islands, because this is what they're experiencing now.
Definitely, definitely. Did anyone else have anything to say before we wrap up?
I saw someone have a question, and I think this question is very important. I think it's from Alexandra.
Yeah, I think that's the question that Marjahn and Angelique just responded to, I believe.
No, she reposted twice.
Yeah, she said that we're posting since it's only previously sent to the panelists, because she only sent it to the panelists and not to everyone. So
Yeah.
that's why she was reposting it. But yeah, I just want to say, like, first of all, y'all are pop. Look at this chat. This chat has tons of questions, y'all, and please don't be frustrated with us because we can't get to all the questions. But this just goes to show how brilliant our panelists are. One, how brilliant Nana and Andrea are two for co-creating this together, and also the not just interest but understanding that we are in a dire straits right now, especially the Caribbean, and the importance of all of us coming together and learning from one another. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Marjahn, I'm gonna call you Dr. Adelle Thomas now. I'm on camera, because I know you told me not to call you doctor, but I'm gonna call you Dr. Adelle Thomas. Dr. Angelique Nixon, thank you. I'm so happy to see you again. And Phylicia, thank you so much for your work. And your organizing and your community building. And we just really appreciate you all so much. If you look through the comments, thank you all so much. Really great panel, looking forward. And also people are asking about email and social media, right? And I dropped the social media before, but please follow Black Women Radicals on Twitter. You can find the social media of our panelists there. But once again, just really thankful for you all. And I really want to give Nana and Andrea the last word before we close. But I just want to say thank you for your brilliance. And it's always a pleasure to learn from, I'm going to just say it, dope ass, badass Caribbean feminists. Okay.
I just want to say that y'all are absolutely amazing. And I want us to continue collaborating together on more bigger projects. Also that this conversation will continue. I just saw Lizanne Charles just posted in the chat. Lizanne will be joining us and for our next conversation, along with some other great Caribbean feminists to continue this conversation on honoring our scientists, our advocates, our activists at the vanguard of this fight for climate and environmental justice. Nana?
Thank you all so much. I deeply appreciate the spaces that we create here. I learn something every time, especially here. And I am definitely going to take a note on this. I freelance write. I think my next pitch is going to be specifically on climate change. Thanks for the motivation and just for the information. I will be citing everybody, cite Black women. Remember, every time, all the time, bop, bop. Thank you all for joining us. This was great. This was great.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night. And people were asking about a reading list. Don't worry, y'all. We got y'all back. Okay, don't worry, y'all. Don't shoot the messengers, y'all. But anyway, thank y'all so much and have a great night.
Good night.
Bye. Thank y'all.